Okay, so well ready?
Sure.
Okay. So this is basically a wrap-up panel for all the orchestration talks that we had. This is why I borrowed, not borrowed, actually two. Florian title, Orchestration Confusion, because there is a lot of tools and a lot of options, and there is no clear answer on what to use. So I thought that it would be a good topic for a panel where you could actually ask the expert and get an answer, different answers, and hopefully a healthy debate about what are the choices, because we do tend to be religious about the options, the choices as well. So we got, I think, a healthy list of panelists. We got Kobi Holzer, who is actually, I think, building the largest, and he'll talk for himself, largest OpenStack deployment in Israel. Florian Haas, that I think needs no introduction. Nicolas, you've been here with the room for a while, so you know him pretty well by now. And Oad, that some of you have seen this morning. Each one of them will introduce himself in a second, and myself. The logo is actually a custom that was actually inspiring this shirt afterwards, so becoming an official thing. So that was Purim this year, and then it turned to be this shirt. So I think it was an interesting occasion on itself, inspired by my son and the Lego film that some of you probably have seen. Anyway, come back to the panel. Let's start with a quick introduction. Quick rules. For you guys, try not to agree. For you guys, don't be shy. Okay? Just ask questions. Okay, so let's start from you.
Yeah.
So, quick introduction about this.
Sure. So I'm Nicolas Thomas from Canonical. We also have Mark. And you get a presentation. Our story around orchestration is all about Juju and around Juju. Having OpenStack as one amongst many of the workloads Juju can handle. And Juju has been designed from the ground up to work at the service level, because this is what you need when you go to cloud to scale up. We talked this morning about 24,000 servers per one human being. That's less than 6 seconds per week per server. It's enormous. You can't even click on something to do with this. It takes more time. So we need better tools that works at the level we think. So the level we think is the services, and let some tool take care of all those little machines, use them, drop them, take another one, etc. And that's what makes us make Juju. Plus we make it, we talk about disagreeing and things like this. We make it agnostic. If you love Ruby, Python, Bash, something else, you can use Juju. There is CLIs. You can use CLIs. You can have an API. You can write a new one, and it's all open source. So you can even make it better if you so wish.
That's the best answer. Everyone likes. It's open source. You can go ahead with it. Juju tab. Kobi.
Hi, Kobi Holzer from LivePerson. I'm director of cloud deployment. So that means basically that our OpenStack infrastructure, production, and in R&D, everything to do with deployment, including a continuous integration team and R&D's infrastructure in total. So this is my area, and I will try today to share my experience with the automation and orchestration tools, which there is a lot of debates, a lot of options, and a lot of good choices. So hope we can get some conclusions here today.
My name is Florian. I run Stexo, which is a professional services company. About 2 years ago, when we started getting into the OpenStack community, we got a question relatively often from customers, which was, should we be using OpenStack? We don't get that question that often anymore. That's a yes. But now what we are discussing with customers a lot is how do I best deploy OpenStack and how do I best deploy my applications, my services on top of OpenStack. And as pretty much always in information technology, there's no one clear answer. It certainly depends on your specific requirements and your specific environment and infrastructure. And that's what we help people do and help people decide.
Hi, I'm Oad. I started many years ago as a sysadmin and slowly started to manage a very large set of infrastructure across multiple data centers and locations way before OpenStack ever existed. And I felt the pain of the operation pain and later on the lack of ability to delegate and grow your infrastructure. I was one of the early adopters of Puppet back in 2007. And later on, out of my experience, started to develop a few tools and ecosystems around Puppet and other tools. I'm the primary author of Foreman, which is a data center, multi-data center, basically management framework. And these days I work at Red Hat, and we continue to develop Foreman and associated integrations with OpenStack.
Excellent. So I'll kick off with 3 questions, but again, we don't have a lot of time, so the panel is for you to ask questions. So if you do have questions, do raise them up, and we'll start that. So I'll start with Kobe. What is your choices of tools right now?
Okay, obviously there are a lot of tools, and for each organization, different tools are a better match. In my experience, for live person experience, for the configuration management, we chose Puppet, something like more than 3 years ago, and we did something pretty amazing. We taught the entire R&D organization and production organization, which is more than 200 people, we taught them Puppet. Okay, so every service we deploy, every server we manage, everything that have to do with production end to end is done by Puppet. There is a CI, continuous integration, will not deploy anything without the Puppet. We have a RPM plugin, so together Puppet and RPM are the package that R&D deliver to production for deployment. So everything end to end is done with the Puppet. This is in terms of chain configuration management.
You mentioned in your Ignite this morning that you're currently evaluating heat. What are you evaluating for? What kept you from using it up to this point? And what is your verdict on it? Are you going to use it? Or are you not going to use it? If no, why not? What's your thinking?
Okay, so before heat, we are evaluating now Cloudify.
Okay.
Okay, so we feel like it's a better fit, and because with the integration with Puppet, which we want to keep working with, and we feel it's like a better match for us. It can probably save us a lot of time working with heat, which is it's not a complete solution for our needs up till now. So there is nothing definite yet. It's not. It's only a POC with Cloudify, and we're testing heat as well in order to be able to benchmark between the solutions and see what's best for us.
What is missing in Puppet in your opinion?
Missing in Puppet? Orchestration. Puppet Labs acquired M Collective for the orchestration part, and it's horrible. We deployed M Collective, we keep upgrading it, and it doesn't work good enough.
Just to clarify, your definition of orchestration here is anything that extends beyond the management of a single node. We're looking at a single node as a unit of management.
Exactly. Yeah. It's to do ad hoc orchestration in the gradual rollout and things that you don't do with configuration management, at least not with Puppet or Chef. So M Collective, we have a very bad experience with it, and we spent more than a year learning it and trying to deploy it. So we are planning to start checking now SaltStack as the orchestrator, but it will not end there. There are a lot of orchestration needs that we need. For example, provisioning to the OpenStack. For the provisioning, I mentioned Cloudify. Also, we wrote our own provisioning tool that, of course, know exactly what we need in live person in order to deploy a new instance. We also started working with F5 because we're working with F5 for the load balancers and firewall, so we wanted that integrated into the OpenStack API as well. So using our own homemade provisioning tool, we will able to orchestrate new instances up to bring them into the load balancers.
So since Florian kind of took the role of the moderator, I'll allow myself to interject into the discussion as a panelist for a second here, just to say my opinion. And I know
did
you have
your
another
favor,
question.
okay.
Yeah. So what I wanted to say about the thing that Kobe mentioned is that at the end of the day, and that's something that I said earlier in the morning for those who heard that, at the end of the day, every technology has a sweet spot. And there wouldn't be one solution that covers them all. I mean, if you go to Puppet, then they will tell you that they cover the world. And if you go to Chef, they will tell you. If you go to Hit, they will tell you that they cover the world. And if you go to each one of them, at the end, each one of them has a sweet spot. And what you need to do is just identify that sweet spot. And from an orchestration perspective, it becomes an integration project. Integration of all those tools. And then it really comes down to how well you can integrate that and how well you could plug all the right solution for the job. That realization for us, for example, came through the DevOps days. We organized events, not just this one, but also the DevOps day, where we started with trying to find one solution for a lot of the problems and implement everything in one solution. And we realized that it's a chain of tools. Now it's a question of integration. So right now, in my view, it's moving from it's Hit or Puppet or whatever to who does the integration for me, because it's going to be today this tool, tomorrow the next tool, and I'm going to have a mix of those things in my environment, but I want them to work well together. So in my view, it's really a question of integration of the tools and being flexible to choose the right tool for the job.
As long as you choose at least configuration management. Anyone.
Yeah. I'm saying you need to choose. You need to have two things. One, it's going to be multiple tools, not one. Second, that tool chain that you use will change over time. So for maybe not the configuration management, but that might also change. But it will change. The monitoring tool that you change. Obviously, the infrastructure that you change. You started with VMware, you ended up with OpenStack, and
I'm not sure I totally agree, because I do agree you need a bunch of tools, but be careful. Configuration management, it's a tricky issue because you need your entire organization to adopt it. You need your entire R&D and production, operations, whatever. You need everyone to adopt the same tool, and having, let's say, even having Ansible and Puppet, or Chef and Puppet, whatever, the combination between the two is dangerous because they will not all speak in the same language.
So
first you need to align everyone.
For example, there was an interesting debate in the summit. I wouldn't say a debate because I didn't let it to develop. I mistakenly it was a debate, but there was a point there about how do we do configuration management? Should we do configuration management in runtime, or should we do it only to create VMs and then everything that goes live is static, relatively static? In the case of Docker, you see that those, if you like, religion and approaches continuously changing, and there is no right or wrong in those things. And it might be that for one type of deployments, let's say production, you may want to use something like Docker and an image-based deployment. That's what Netflix is doing, for example. And if you're doing development and continuous development or some other environments, you may need something else. So I think that the reality is that those things change, and it created a problem like the one that you mentioned, because then if your infrastructure is not stable, you can't really build on top of it. What's that?
Docker and Puppet goes together, Docker with Chef, whatever.
Yes, it could.
No,
But
yeah,
then it's an integration. But
yeah,
I'm
but
saying the approaches could be very different than the one, for example, that you're using right now. Because if you're using an image-based approach versus what you're using right now, where every node has an agent and install everything and take all the artifacts.
So I'm not sure what you're asking, because at the end of the day, we live in a world that everything changes very often. If you look 10 years ago, we had no Puppet, no Chef, no Docker, and no OpenStack.
Right.
So 10 years from now, we'll have something completely sorry. We'll have, 10 years from now, we'll have something completely different, and we all have to adapt as we go along. Now, we want to preserve existing investment, like as we've seen, Kobe wants to keep on using Puppet because he's invested a lot in it, and as he said, plugging Docker and Docker image creation with Puppet sounds a reasonable thing. Potentially, you can even run Puppet in
But
Docker
it changes
after.
the entire way you run operations, that's what I'm saying. It does change the way you run.
Whether you launch a VM or launch a Docker, changes a few things, but it's not a game changer. I mean, it's a game changer in many things. It's not a game changer that you moved from computer to something else.
No, it's not.
So
All I'm saying, and again, in this debate, is there one tool to win them all?
No.
In my view?
No.
I think we all agree on
no,
that.
otherwise we won't have. Obviously, there are many tools
And
that
I
exist.
see
for
that
the-
probably
you disagree,
disagree,
right?
No.
That's
Okay.
So-
as you can see, even with Juju, we have different tools to integrate around.
Because you
We
don't have a
integrate-
choice, you want
we
people to
integrate
use
one.
Juju, although they already
No,
use
we-
Chef or Puppet.
It's just the highest level.
It just-
If you want to, at the end of it, if
we
you
want you guys to talk together. We want to help you to talk together instead of having to learn the language of the other guys or standardizing all organization on one thing. You can have part of the organization, Puppet lovers, and you can have some other guys doing chefs, and thanks to Juju, you can make them work together in production and not having to make them learn the same things in the same language, the same stuff. That's why we made it. We made it also to think and changing the habits to think at the service level. When you want to scale to thousands of units, a few things change, and we're going to integrate with
I want to
Docker.
see if we can extend that question to the audience in terms of, I see that there are some people here that are using other tools, and I'm curious about their choices and things. So it seems to be around Puppet, right? Or
Yes, of course.
Yes.
And Docker as well.
And Docker. So
I'm looking for-
so maybe you could say a few words about what you're using, and what's your use case.
I'm one of the architects to build a really, really large public cloud right now. And
A very large what?
public cloud.
Public cloud. Oh.
Which company?
Cisco. I think externally it is known as like Intercloud. That's the marketing name. Basically, right now, the data center in Amsterdam that is built around OpenStack and a lot of moving components. So my feeling is that, and I love it, I mean, application provisioning, configuration management, it's all kind of the bare bone, the basics and everything. But I think we're dealing a lot with other components that needs application layer configuration. For me, a firewall, for example, or an F5 has a kind of a day zero provisioning just like any other VM. And then day one configuration of just simple infrastructure pieces like interfaces, etc. But there is also application configuration on the F5. For example, whatever F5 can do on load balancing based on this and that algorithm and everything. So I think we are missing in this day an entire, and maybe it is called NFV or others, but NFV is more kind of service provider oriented. But even in a small virtual data center, you have a firewall component, a load balancer component, a switch
Sometimes
component.
we refer to it as end-to-end service orchestration. Maybe this is the-
Right, and a guy that
Just
has
the
a
word.
VPC in Amazon basically want to see its entire stack and everything is configured. The security guy, for example, I guess someone in live person will want to see his technology domain in a sense and not worry about what this.
So, for example, when you face that same question, what was your choices, let's say, for configuration management, for orchestration?
I don't want to say exactly, but I think a requirement for an orchestrator of orchestrators. Okay? Meaning definitely Puppet for configuration management around application, whatever. But something on top right now, it's a commercial product that we acquired to sit on top and do the entire set of pieces, even NetApp API that is built better in this particular orchestrator. Better, I would say, than others. And
So-
I'm
so
not an
let's say-
expert in Juju, but
And
Yeah.
just to answer that, Juju is not we said about boundaries and things we think we can manage and can't manage. It's not the job of Juju to do the configuration of all your parameters, of all the little parameters of all your services. The job of Juju is to make your life simple to scale out the services and to be able to interrelate them and to architect it faster, to being able to have an architect build and try something on a small scale, send it to you, you try it, and in a week, even less. We tried something in architecture, but that's really the orchestration. But that's the definition of orchestration we're
so
talking about,
I'm going to
because
come back to that.
the configuration.
Question for you in that regard, but Florian has been quiet for 2 minutes, so I'm worried about that.
I actually,
so
here's actually a question for the Red Hat team here. So, what the whole? You're the representative here, so feel free to speak for them. That's fine. We've got, when we talk about like full service application orchestration, okay, you guys obviously have your Juju story. Gigaspaces has Cloudify story. As for Red Hat, as of right now, it basically stops at the IaaS level with Heat. So what's your story going forward there? Does Red Hat have a story for that? Do you want to stay out of it? What's the
Well, I can't officially answer because I don't know the full answer, or the right answer. I can say what I personally think. Hopefully, won't get blamed for it internally. So the first thing, there's multiple levels. There's infrastructure management. There's platform. I think there's different. When you talk about orchestration, it exists in multiple areas. We have things like OpenShift, which is application deployment. It has a lot of orchestration internally. When you deploy an app, a lot of services starts up and you can deploy your app. We obviously have infrastructure and configuration management orchestration with Puppet, with Foreman, with Heat. These are different tools. I don't see Red Hat today making anything that you don't know about, because everything we do is out there. So we don't have anything hidden or stashed somewhere.
That's not what I was implying.
So at the end of the day, we do use well-known tools. We try to strive for not necessarily picking one over the other unless there's a good reason. So we're actively working now of abstracting to use both Puppet, both Chef, other Ansible, whatever. Everyone's welcome to join the game. So I don't have anything in the infrastructure world. I don't have anything else besides that. But I do want to maybe go back a bit and talk about the layers of orchestration. And back again to the Puppet discussion before. I think when you develop an application like in LivePerson, where all of the moving parts are very important. I mean, that's your business. And it's like your app stack traditionally that you would know every line of code that you had in your single server back in the days where you understand all the components. Now that your application is distributed, you all of a sudden need to really understand all of the moving parts between the servers, in the servers. Changing your configuration will break your app, and it becomes really layers that until they get stable enough and will get common enough for everyone, like building blocks that everyone can build on top, we will see this fight over orchestration and configuration management, and maybe later on self-service portals and whatever that comes afterwards in the stack. So we need all, ideally, to strive to get to a point where the common problems are solved, which is not today, right? We still have to fight with Puppet. We still need to fix things. We still need to educate the organization to use one tool or the other. These are not solved problems, but like maybe in other layers, like a database could be a service, and I don't care really how it works, but it's a service. So until we get to the point where we have all of these services laid out and everyone feels comfortable, and then the orchestration, I think, will strive, where really we no longer talk in this layer, we go up the stack and talk about another thing in this, somewhere up the stack, and later on we can build even more common things. So until we get to that point, I think all tools are welcome. There's no more than one way to do it. It's right for you.
So a question in that regard, just to again trying to make it a little bit going in line of what you just said. If I give each one of you questions about a set of tools, let's pick a number of tools, and feel free to add more. So let's say let's take Chef, Puppet, obviously we have Juju here, Foreman, just the one I mentioned here.
Heat.
Obviously Cloudify and Heat. Obviously got
Ansible, SATSTAR. Okay, there are a lot of tools. Yeah, we know.
Which is SoundCloud.
So let's stay with that list. If you need to say, let's say the sweet spot for each one, let's say configuration management.
But there is no one truth. So
Right. So let's see if we can say that
it's like a vote.
which one of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Configuration management, orchestration. You mentioned orchestration, right? That's the second category. We might find other categories here, but at least let's try to kind of come up with something.
Just a quick question about Cloudify. Cloudify.
Yeah,
That's something, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you integrate like Puppet scripts or chef recipes and so on into Cloudify?
Yes.
I think you
Yeah.
probably can. Right. So I think your picture is actually better if you think about it layered. Because I think what you'll find is Foreman, Heat, typically operating at an infrastructure type level, right? They're modeling resources. Foreman will model physical and cloud resources, won't it? Right? And Heat does essentially the same. Configuration management, Chef, Puppet, they really specialize in that. That's what we rate at. And others, Salts, CF Engine, there's a long list of those. I mean, I think it sounds to me like Cloudify and Juju have the ability to wrap those things, but then it's still useful to work with something like Foreman or work with something like Heat, which can give you a resources view. So it might be, I think a map makes sense, but I
Yeah, so I
want
then if you
to
like another
layer it.
dimension, which is the layers, as you rightly said, the infrastructure and apps layers, right? Would that
I
fit?
mean, Heat
So-
knows
so-
about apps to a certain extent.
But
But the question is the
That's
sweet
very
spot.
nicely.
But it-
Because each one of them would, if you go to each one of them individually, and if you go to the vendor of each one of them, they will probably say that they can do everything, right?
No, I mean, we would say,
What would you say?
plug Chef or Puppet in
Okay.
to your chunk.
And where would you,
And I
would
suspect
be your
Cloudify
sweet
would
spot?
say the same thing.
Right, so you're
Yeah.
basically saying that your sweet spot would be here or here, or
Well, I think our sweet spot would be at the app modeling layer.
at the
Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Salt, so what we'd say is that the config story, like do a service with one of those things, then you do it
Okay.
really well. So we'd model at the service level, the config for the service.
And you would, basically what you're saying is
and
that
we
you
do
would
that on
be
Foreman, we'll do
integrated
that on NAS, we'll do that on Heat.
Right.
So
So for the rest, for configuration management, you basically want to integrate.
The thing is, configuration management has no really clear boundaries. I mean, you could do a lot with a
Yeah,
bash
that's what I'm
script.
saying. I'm saying
you can
that-
deploy your cloud with a bash script. So
That's why I asked about sweet spot.
Right.
Because when you ask
But
about
again-
boundaries,
and again,
then
the
you're
question
getting
is-
into.
The question is about personas, maybe. Who is the right persona consuming your service? Is it a cloud operator? Is the app deployer? Who is,
No,
you know?
so I'm asking in each individual, rather than asking generically. I'm asking
Yeah, but
each individual. here,
how can
I'm
I
trying to get-
answer?
Yeah, based on your experience, based on your knowledge. It's a very opinionated answer.
Okay, for each and every...
It's your opinion about that thing, and I
Okay.
think a collective view of that will give us some interesting insight, maybe. Let's see.
I want to be last.
Okay, so we'll start with Kobe in that case, because he's the consumer of the room here.
Okay, so obviously Puppet for me, the configuration management.
Okay.
Orchestration, I didn't sit in my mind. I just know it's not M collective.
Okay.
It might be. It's probably a few things bound together. So.
Okay.
Do you have Foreman for the Puppet dashboard?
Sorry?
We do use Foreman for the Puppet
Okay.
dashboard.
Good for you.
We might use it also for the provisioning service instead of the Cobra.
Okay.
That's about it for now. We are doing with Cloudify and Heat POCs, but
Okay.
It's
And,
not,
and mostly in this area, right?
yeah.
In the
Yeah, the
orchestration.
orchestration. Yeah, configuration management is only Puppet. I'm not sure that we are on the right track here with this list. I'm not sure it's maybe let's ask the audience if they're interested to know exactly what tools we use and which one we prefer. Maybe everyone, like I mentioned before, needs a different tool for a different assignment. So it doesn't matter if I say Puppet or Chef, whatever. As long as you use one and you love something, then you will use it best. So what do you think, Nati?
I'll go to Florian
Can
and
I
then
ask
yes.
as a customer, as a customer of the cloud, let's say I'm a software developer. I wrote my Rails application. I know that I use their MongoDB. Now I want to deploy it. Okay, so I use one tool for deployment. Let's say it took me 2 weeks to learn SaltStack. Without writing one line of code, I managed to deploy it. Now I need to make sure that everything is up and running. Okay, so I'm starting to look for another tool. Then I deployed collect D to make sure that the services on the machine are not going more than 100%. Then I will have to add SNMPD to send traps about what is going on the machine. I'm looking for one tool where I would like to say, this is my application, I would like to deploy it, make sure that this application is up and running, somewhere see the performance of the application and make sure that somebody gets email or SMS if something happens.
Congratulations on your startup idea.
No, really, and once
You
I'm starting
probably don't want one tool that does all the things that you talked about. I think you do want one tool that will bring it all up for sure. Once you start getting into performance management and so on and so forth, it's healthy to start looking to other tools. There's a taste thing about how much you want one tool to do, and history tells us as soon as you start getting one tool that tries to do everything, sooner or later it becomes very average at everything.
Yeah, okay.
But in terms of
something integrate,
bringing it up,
so that's
right now,
I mean,
we could get on EC2 right now, bring up Mongo, bring up Collect-D, bring up what app server were you going to use? Node.js, Rails, yeah,
Right.
bring up Rails. All of those things we could bring up with Juju immediately, and you'd be using off-the-shelf pieces, and you could do that on OpenStack or EC2 or VMware or any cloud you like, or bare metal on Foreman or on Mass, right? Those pieces, those standard pieces, bring up very, very quickly. Your app, you obviously then would need to do the work for. You need to sort of say how you want your app to lay into that, right? In the case of a Rails thing, it's easy, it just plugs into Rails,
Okay.
right? And then I would look to another tool for when you start getting into cost management, like there are various startups, Cloudin and others that will do good cost evaluation type stuff. I wouldn't want to put that stuff into Juju because you're getting into weird, just crossing means then, right? Just like we didn't put physical provisioning into Juju, you can use Foreman, you can use Maz, you can use other things for physical provisioning. But the app orchestration layer, tomorrow to this afternoon, you could bring up certainly Mongo, Collect-D, Graphite, all the sorts of base infrastructure that you were describing. Yeah.
So I think that really, creates almost a new category of things, which is more of an integration platform, which we kind of looked at things from a layer perspective. And if we look at it from an end user perspective, we just want to get this app running.
But that's why PaaS exists. I mean, he needs to go to Roku or OpenShift or something and just deploy his code. He doesn't
Not
necessarily...
necessarily, because what PaaS does is addresses a very specific use case. I have a greenfield application and I want to run my code somewhere without knowing anything about the infrastructure or knowing very little about
Basically
the
what he just said,
No,
someone else will get a mail.
Didn't say
PaaS
anything about
provides all the
greenfield.
services that he's describing, then
Yeah.
yes, for sure. If the PaaS provides all those. What does
But
Cloudify do
second-
for integration?
Yeah, so I'm saying that integration is all about Cloudify. First and foremost is the realization that we need to have a lot of plugins, and then we need to have some gluing mechanism to get to the point where the user experience of using all those different technology wouldn't be as complex as you would otherwise. So that from a user perspective, you'd see one dashboard, and it would look like one big system, but at the end of the day, it would be a lot of those different plugins that you can plug in. So it's a difference between what the end user wants and how you bring that to that end user, and realization that it's a tool chain and not one platform. So I would say that Cloudify is an integration, a lot of integration, if you like, for the philosophy in mind, taking a message bus and doing a lot of plugin architecture. And the second, it's the Tosca model that comes to that. I'm kind of took my Gigaspecialist hat for a second here. So being a little bit more neutral again, I think that what I'm seeing in a lot of those discussions evolving is that the need for that integration, kind of a new category, that is not necessarily heat, or not necessarily Puppet, or not necessarily in a certain layer like infrastructure. It's more of an integration platform.
So we call it service orchestration, right? And I think it's what Cloudify is doing as well.
So I'm trying to think out loud if service orchestration is an integration platform, because I'm not sure that the heat guys will look at themselves. I don't know.
It's not service orchestration.
Yes,
but he
but it is considered as an orchestration, right? So is it the integration
So
platform?
Tosca, I think, is very interesting. You should talk about Tosca. Yes. I think Tosca will emerge as a sort of standard for that integration layer.
Right, exactly.
Certainly, we're working with IBM on Tosca for Juju, so I think Tosca would be very useful to tell people.
I'm not necessarily sure if I disagree with that. If I agree with that in being one standard, because what I'm seeing in specific sort of niche markets for OpenStack is a broader approach, which is there is a need for sort of translator cartridges in front of an orchestration layer, like Heat, out of which Tosca is one. But for example, a lot of what's coming out of the ETSI NFV working group that also defines orchestration guidelines, API guidelines, etc.
Yang, which is a different model.
Right, yes. That is another thing that we're going to see, and I'm guessing we're going to see similar standards or complementary standards emerging in financial, in healthcare, in whatever. So I don't think that Tosca is going to be the end-all, be-all, but instead it's going to be an example of how we're seeing these translators in front of an orchestration engine that can be Heat, or it can even be CloudFormation, it can be VCO, whatever. I just think that there is a need for translating these industry standard committee-defined definitions into something that goes
I want to
into
say
the
this
infrastructure.
just for the sake of sort of
Okay.
get your juice a little bit. The reason why I'm saying is that I think that again, I'm thinking out loud here. Okay, we need some basic foundation for doing that type of integration, and that basic foundation needs to be generic foundation that says here's a blueprint and here's how to describe the blueprint that the software can understand.
Yeah.
And I think Tosca does that. Okay, provide that generic thing.
Yeah, I'm just
And
not.
It doesn't mean that you can't really have specific domain-specific blueprints on top of it. But the problem is that if you start to have domain-specific blueprints for every domain, and without any common foundation, that becomes a mess, in my opinion. And I think that I'll tell you how we got to Tosca. The experience was we looked at Tosca initially. It was an XML based. Like that, I said, too complex. I don't want to touch something like that. Neither my users, and for good reasons.
Yeah, now try to think of a framework
And
that
then we
describes
go for
HIPAA compliance or SEC compliance. It's not going to get any less complex.
Hold on a second. I'll finish that in 1 minute. And what we ended up doing is something simpler. And in our case, was in Groovy, and we build it up. And after a year or two, we find ourselves starting to add relationship and add metrics and custom metrics and then we looked at that and we said, well, actually, that's not that far from Tosca. What we ended up doing and not adopting something like that. That's when we realized that we're.
I'm just saying. I consider it unlikely that you're going to get some very entrenched verticals to adopt some quote unquote random OASIS specification. That's just not what's going to happen.
But the addition of OpenStack changes things, because OpenStack, that if it was only OASIS, and it happened with Neutron in Way or some other specification, as soon as you have a common platform that people can work on with code and real implementation, it will happen, in my opinion. If it's only Oasis
I would agree.
doing
Tosca
specification,
has limitations. I would strongly agree. But I also think that as soon as you start doing this at scale over many companies, over many industries, you find yourself coming back to the things that Tosca. You know, we picked Tosca because Tosca picked Juju. We saw a lot of cutting and pasting between the Juju documentations and the Tosca specification.
Yeah, because-
But we said, well, yeah, fuck it. If they it's just standardizing Juju, we may as well change Juju an implementation of the standard.
Just an interface differences. It's
Right.
nothing. The data model was
But
so
it's-
similar.
But it's a big thing.
And that's
a very
that's
big
only
thing.
the
If you
big thing
standardize
is the
on
data model.
But there's so many-
the way you can describe the blueprint.
And the data model that
becomes
shows
huge.
that you need the
Like
orchestration
then
and
you
the
could have-
complexity.
But there's
the
just
problem that he
so
mentioned
many
becomes much more.
communities out there that would like to build a better wheel.
Yeah. I've been
That's why
sitting in committees.
Having a standard is useful because there can be other implementations.
Yeah.
So, you know, for me, it's kind of frustrating that people associate Juju so strongly with Ubuntu because we did it. I would have liked to do RHEL sooner, right? We need to wait for a customer. But there will be multiple implementations, and so having a standard is kind of useful, just because it tends to align things, even if the standard's not perfect. The other thing that I think we'll see, you're right, the vertical standard is super important.
Yeah.
But people find ways to kind of be pragmatic about that. So you'll find ways for people to deliver on ETSI NFE orchestration with Tosca. And it'll be a little bit ugly, but they'll find ways to do it because of the propensity to reuse, right? It's just so much cheaper. Like I've never,
We do have a propensity to reuse, but we also live in an industry that's rife with NIH.
Sure. But so if you look at telco, the same guys who are pushing in NFV are the same guys who are saying we're tired of NIH in this industry, right? So,
Yeah.
so of course, as soon as something becomes gets momentum, it gets hijacked.
Yeah.
So all the NIH guys climb in and saying, well, now that we're doing NFV, let's do it properly.
Yeah.
Which means NIH.
Yeah.
So there's the pendulum swings left, right, and center. But I think having a standard is useful, even if it's just a beacon.
Yeah.
So one last question on that regard. Keeps on when I'm reading the surveys and statistics about Puppet and Chef and all that, I kind of noticed that if you go to Chef, if you go to EC2, you see a lot of Chef. Obviously, OpsWork is using Chef. And if you go to OpenStack, you see very much Puppet. You see kind of different tool chain, if you like, in OpenStack than you would see in EC2, for example. Some reason,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure what it is.
I think
Do you have an idea?
I think that's largely sort of a first mover advantage type of thing. You mentioned Amazon OpsWorks, and that they selected Chef. That's what they provided. That's what people used as a default. The Puppet community simply was the fastest to pick up OpenStack before Chef did it, and Ansible and SaltStack were not even on the map.
So
at
it
the
wasn't
time.
something in the type of, I mean, it's not because OpenStack is mostly enterprises and EC2 is mostly startups. I wouldn't say startups, but Web 2 kind of guys or things like that.
I think it's a go with what works type of approach.
I don't think Netflix is a startup.
No, it's not, but it's
There's a
a
dynamic
web.
there, I think.
It's not enterprise.
Well,
There is an interesting dynamic there in that the audience for EC2 is very startup oriented. It's no baggage, no legacy, no history, right? So they tend to be sort of adopting whatever's the current cleanest, fastest, cheapest way to do something. And I think Amazon responded to that by picking Chef. Whereas if you look at Mark's talk from Red Hat's talk today, you're saying like to be an effective contributor to OpenStack, you kind of have to have been around it a while, right? You need to be a little bit deeper into it. You need to have you're under the hood, right? Not just surfing on top. And so those guys, they tend to be just of a slightly older generation, and Puppet came first. So I think there actually is something to what you're saying. The guys who are building OpenStack, they were trying to automate stuff, not on the cloud, but they were trying to automate stuff kind of a little bit earlier, and so they tended to pick up Puppet. Puppet was kind of the second one along, the CF engine, and then you had Puppet, and then you got Chef, and now we've got Salt Ansible. So I think you're right, there's sort of a generational thing there that leaks out. But there's nothing stopping people from doing great stuff with Salt on OpenStack, right?
Yeah.
So,
Okay, I think we are about to, it's very interesting, so I can continue, whatever. But I think we need to get to the other tracks. This is, a favorite topic for me, so I can talk about it endlessly, and I don't want to exhaust all the rest of the people, so I want to thank all panelists, like the audience, and Mark. Thank you for joining us.
sorry for being
Thank you, guys.
noisy
Thank you
audience.
for joining.